Rumors travel fast online, and gospel music fans discovered exactly how fast in early 2026. When Bill Gaither turned 90 in March of that year, posts began appearing across social media claiming he was quietly stepping back from public life, offering a silent goodbye to the fans who had followed him for years, retreating slowly from the music that had shaped everything he ever built. People who loved his recordings, who had grown up with his songs playing in church on Sunday mornings, picked up those posts and passed them along, and for a brief stretch, the idea of a legendary figure fading quietly into retirement started to feel like something real. None of it was true. Not a single claim held up against what was actually happening, and what was actually happening could not have been further from a quiet ending. The real story of Bill Gaither's 90th birthday is bigger and louder than anything those rumors described, and it begins not with a somber farewell, but with more than 250 singers filling a Tennessee recording studio, voices stacked on voices, old friends standing beside new faces, in what stands as one of the most ambitious gatherings in the entire history of the homecoming tradition he and his wife Gloria built together. Born William James Gaither on March 28, 1936, in the small town of Alexandria, Indiana, Bill grew up in a setting where faith and music arrived together, bound so naturally to each other that separating them never seemed worth the effort. His path into music was not the kind of straightforward trajectory that most people imagine when they think about artists who eventually become legends. School came first, and he treated that seriously. After studying English and music at Taylor University, he continued on to Anderson University, finished his degree, and then moved in a direction that still surprises people who only know him as one of gospel music's most respected names. He became a classroom teacher. He stood in front of students, taught English, graded papers, and built the habits of someone who believed that ordinary work done with care was its own kind of calling. But even during those teaching years, the music moved quietly underneath everything else. Back in 1956, while still working through college, he had already formed the Bill Gaither Trio with his sister Marianne and his brother Danny, a small family group that wasn't chasing anything in particular, but simply doing what felt honest and right. That modest beginning planted something that kept growing for the next 70 years. And then, in 1962, he married Gloria Gaither, a partnership that became one of the most consequential collaborations in the history of Christian music, not just for what it produced on paper, but for the songwriting tradition they built together and the audiences that tradition eventually reached across decades and continents. Their approach to writing songs was built on simplicity, and that simplicity was always the point rather than a limitation. Gloria shaped the words, Bill shaped the music, and between them, they built something grounded in plain and honest emotion, rather than the kind of impressive complexity that earns admiration from other musicians, but rarely reaches someone sitting in a pew during a hard week. The songs they wrote together talked about fear during seasons when the world felt completely out of control, about the specific comfort that arrives during grief when logic runs out, about a quiet and unhurried joy that doesn't announce itself with noise, but simply settles in and stays. That honesty found listeners who had never considered themselves gospel music fans before, because it wasn't really asking them to belong to any particular tradition. It was describing human experiences that nearly anyone could recognize. Over the decades, they wrote hundreds of songs together, but a few of them grew into something much larger than songs. Because He Lives arrived in the early 1970s, written during a period when both the country and the wider world felt genuinely unstable, and it became one of the most recorded gospel songs in history, performed at weddings, at funerals, in church sanctuaries across every continent, passed from parents to children and from pastors to their congregations, as something belonging not just to its writers, but to anyone who had ever needed it. He Touched Me carried that same refusal to overcomplicate the message, and it found the same kind of audience for the same reasons. Those songs were not written to win recognition, even though recognition did come. 3 separate inductions into the Gospel Music Hall of Fame placed Gaither in company that almost no other songwriter in the genre has ever reached, a measure of how deeply those hymns had settled into the history and living practice of religion in America and beyond. The Gaither vocal band grew directly from the foundation that original trio had established, expanding over time into one of the most recognizable names in Southern gospel. Singers including Mark Lowry, David Phelps, Guy Penrod, and Wes Hampton all moved through the group at different points across the years, each one bringing a distinct voice and personality while staying inside the sound and approach that Gaither had spent years developing. The group built its own devoted following and its own catalog of recorded work, and it became one of the primary vehicles through which a new generation of listeners found their way into the broader world of gospel music and contemporary Christian music more generally. But the Homecoming series remains the project that most fully captures what Bill Gaither set out to build across his career. These gatherings were never designed to look like polished concerts or staged performances. Singers settled in around a piano, informal and relaxed, and worked through old hymns and sacred songs, the way people sing at family reunions rather than ticketed events, without a rigid set list or a script anyone had to follow. The recordings from those sessions, first released as videos and later as television specials, became something that fans returned to again and again, particularly among those who loved traditional Southern gospel and felt that mainstream Christian entertainment had largely stopped reflecting anything they recognized as their own. Bill typically stayed near the piano during those gatherings, stepping back and letting other voices carry the room forward, and that willingness to create space for others rather than occupy it himself became as much a part of his reputation as any individual song he ever wrote. The Homecoming series brought older artists back to an audience that had nearly lost track of them, and introduced those same artists to younger listeners who had never heard their names before. Holding a musical tradition together while simultaneously expanding its reach across new generations takes patience and a very specific kind of vision. And Bill Gaither held both for more than 5 decades without losing either. None of that slowed in the fall of 2025. It grew. More than 250 singers and musicians traveled to TBN Studios in Hendersonville, Tennessee, for a recording day that became one of the largest and most emotionally charged sessions in all of Homecoming history. Artists from multiple generations filled that space throughout the day, some who had been part of the tradition since its very beginning, others who had spent their childhoods watching those videos and were now standing beside the artists they had admired from a living room television set. Bill described the experience of standing among all those voices as deeply moving, and everyone present seemed to carry that feeling all the way through the session. The atmosphere sat closer to a reunion than a recording session, with the music as the reason everyone had gathered, and the shared history as the thing that made it feel completely unlike anything those artists had ever been part of before. Gloria contributed a personal spoken segment that gave the day a reflective and unhurried quality, grounding the celebration in something beyond performance. Sonia Isaacs led an unaccompanied version of Amazing Grace, with only voices and no instruments at all. And that particular performance reportedly brought the entire room to a still and quiet place. Sam Parsons performed Sweet Beulah Land, a hymn written by his late father, Squire Parsons, connecting 2 generations of the same family through a single performance in a moment that felt both carefully planned and entirely spontaneous at the same time. The title track, I Go to the Rock, featured Jason Crabb, Angela Prim, and Chris Blue in a performance with enough energy to carry the full weight of the occasion. Classic songs including Where Could I Go and Just As I Am wove through the sessions alongside newer material, and the very first track shared publicly from the project was Bread Upon the Water, featuring Wes Hampton, Marshall Hall, Michael Booth, Ronnie Booth, Ernie Hassa, and Dustin Doyle, a performance that established the tone for everything that followed it. All of it became the album I Go to the Rock, officially released on March 27, 2026, one full day before Bill Gaither's 90th birthday. More than 70 songs in total came out of that single live recording day, and the project was made available in every format the Gaithers could bring to bear to ensure it reached the widest possible audience. CD and DVD releases gave longtime fans something physical to hold and return to. A television special aired across multiple networks worldwide so that anyone unable to attend in person could still watch the full event unfold. Gaither TV Plus, the streaming platform built around his catalog, carried the complete project for anyone who preferred watching from home on their own schedule. And Sirius XM radio listeners found the recording on Bill's own dedicated channel, Enlighten, where music from the album ran alongside decades of his broader work. That reach was entirely intentional. Getting music to as many people as possible has always been the organizing principle behind how the Gaithers distribute their work, not only for dedicated followers who have tracked every release for 30 or 40 years, but also for anyone stumbling across this tradition for the very first time through a broadcast, a streaming recommendation, or a recording passed along by someone who thought they might connect with something inside it. What those online rumors got completely wrong was the direction of the story. They described a man retreating from everything he had spent his life building. What actually happened was a man gathering, assembling, and celebrating at a scale that would challenge artists half his age to attempt. 7 decades of writing about faith, pulling singers together from across Southern gospel and the broader world of Christian music, and building a musical family that now spans multiple generations and hundreds of individual artists. And turning 90 gave Bill Gaither one more reason to do all of it again at once. The legacy he and Gloria built together runs wide enough now that it carries forward through all of those younger voices who grew up inside the world the Gaithers created, learning the songs, absorbing the values of generosity and honesty and faith that ran through everything Bill and Gloria ever made together. Every one of those voices showed up in Tennessee that fall, literally or in spirit, to celebrate not just a birthday, but a life still being lived with full intention, clear purpose, and music that has never once stopped doing exactly what it was always written to do.